Hello, everyone. Welcome to the ninth episode of season two of This, That, and the Other. My name is Varun Chandramohan, your host for today. Now, This, That, and the Other is a series that tackles some of the biggest and most debated topics that both managers and employees encounter in their professional and personal lives. Now, so far in this series, we've explored topics such as the pursuit of happiness. We looked at if it was a fool's dream or a possibility. We looked at longevity and if it was down to genetics or choice. Bias in the workplace when personal life choices collided with your professional life. We looked at office politics and the art of sucking up. We've also looked at disruptive HR practices, if they were easier said than done. Expats and trailing spouses, another topic that was rarely explored, and we looked at the trials and tribulations of working abroad. We spoke about good parenting while climbing the corporate ladder, and just last week we spoke about patience, attitude, and grit, and we looked at if those qualities can be learned. Now, on today's show, we'll be talking about a topic that's literally the elephant in the room in the corporate world out there. Are MBAs and DBAs in the corporate world, are they a requirement or an adornment? So just a reminder to everyone, all our past episodes of This, That, and the Other and our other webinar series are available on Luminary Learning Solutions YouTube page. So do swing by our page and don't forget to like our videos and hit that subscribe button. All right, it's time to introduce my guest. First up, she's an entrepreneur, transformation and leadership coach, visual storyteller, writer, and is a founder of Luminous Leadership in South Africa and the co-founder and director at the Creative Stone Company. Alison Y is here with us today. Hello, Alison. Welcome to the show.
Hi, so nice to be here.
Oh, the pleasure is ours. All right, next up, he's a world-renowned consultant, coach, trainer, and speaker, and he currently serves as the founder and CEO of Orion Human Capital and the co-founder of Soul Inspired Leadership in Singapore. Ross Swan is here with us today. Hello, Ross. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, looking forward to our discussion. Very much so.
Fantastic, and likewise. And finally, our next guest, she has over 20 years of planning and strategy experience in driving and managing change. She served in the US Army for over 17 years. She is currently the owner and coach at Nichols Niche. I just love that name. Nicole Jaramillo is here with us today. Hello, Nicole. Nice to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited about the topic.
Fantastic. The pleasure is ours. All right, everyone. Thank you once again for being here. Now, in the best interest of the audience, I wanted to start off our conversation by asking my panel about degrees in general. Do we really need them? I recently read an article that talks about how Apple and Google and all of these, large companies are looking to hire, or rather looking for new ways to hire people without college degrees, and they're not alone, and maybe others are doing the same. But leaving aside the technical jobs, especially the STEM field, which would obviously require more education, if we're talking about the rest of the jobs, and I'd like to start with you, Nicole. Do we really need degrees? Any thoughts on that?
So coming from someone who has degrees, right? I've got a bachelor's, I've got 2 master's degrees. I'm all but dissertation complete on a PhD, and I'm going back for my doctorate, my educational doctorate, so that I can actually get that doctorate degree. Right. I do not think that we need to have degrees. I think that education is important, and I value education a great deal, but I think that life experience brings a very important component to what someone brings to the field and brings to the corporate world. It doesn't do us any good to bring somebody in with a degree that can't relate those skills and those capabilities in a way that is applicable, right? How do you, it's that difference between being smart and being naive and being able to street smart or book smart. Which one do you want? It's kind of that combination of both.
You said the word there, street smart instead of book smart. Sometimes it's a great excuse to hide behind the degree. I've got a degree, so therefore I'm intelligent type attitude, and that's damaging. So to me, to answer that question, degrees are nice to have, not a must-have in the corporate world.
Absolutely.
Right. Alison, any thoughts on it?
Yes, I'm going to start with a disclaimer to say that I don't have an MBA. And I did start one years ago, but then I launched into a 30-year entrepreneurial process. And I think I have a MBHL, which is a master's in hard lessons in business. So I've had an interesting process in that the one hand, I've had some sort of background, but subsequent to that, I've done a huge amount of diplomas, huge amount of personal development. So I almost sit with the reality of looking at both. And I think that in some ways, it's what you do with the wisdom. There's data, there's knowledge, and there's wisdom to move humanity forward. And it's finding that trajectory, I think, that we are on the cusp of looking at the world in a new way of knowledge.
That's
absolutely.
Get on there. How to take the knowledge and apply it.
Yeah.
And in a leadership sense, how do you apply it through other people? So that's
absolutely. And I have an interesting question to ask my panel. You've seen memes going around and so on that say education isn't equal to intelligence. In your experience, in what you've seen, do you agree with that statement? This is open to the panel, and we can have a discussion on that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I could. Yeah, absolutely. I'm a perfect example. I got my master's at the age of 50. I never had a degree before that, and yet I was a senior executive running a region in Australia in the corporate world. I never had a degree. A bit like Alison, you learn by experience, plus the odd diploma, associate diploma course. But that doesn't mean to say I'm not intelligent. It just meant that I wasn't motivated enough to go for a degree earlier because I didn't know what I really wanted to do long term. So it comes back to motivation, not intelligence, quite often. If you want to be an accountant, you go and get a degree, and because that's what you need.
Right.
Executive coach. When I was 25, never heard of till I was about 15 years ago when I became a coach, and I was one of the first. Right, so it takes time. It'll get it, and then I go off and do a master's just to learn a bit of background research. That's all I did it for.
Sure.
And I only used to just pass. I never got honours. I used to just do enough to pass. So I get P's, right? Because I just did what I needed to do and took out what I needed to take, whether that was relevant to the exam. I took out what I needed to learn. Sorry, I'm overtaking here. Ladies, go for it.
I think there's an interesting story around intelligence, and what I've been grappling with lately is that there's IQ, there's EQ, and what I've started to dabble with is IDQ, which is identity intelligence, which is a little bit different, which is really knowing, and it's something that just sort of came up for me. It's really having clarity and purpose and vision of why you're meant to be here. And it's a different level, and it doesn't have to be in degrees. It can be in other forms. It can embrace all learning. So that's just something it's just something that's really come up for me in the last year. It's just a different perspective, I think.
I agree with that, Alison. That's totally been my life's journey. Is when you find your purpose, then you move towards it. But you don't get your purpose necessarily at 25. Some people do. Others get it at the age of 50. So.
Right. Nicole, any thoughts on your experience with that?
It's interesting. I have 4 children, right? My youngest is 16, my oldest is 23, and then I have an 18 and a 20-year-old. And we talk all the time about this, right? My 16-year-old is very driven, wants to go to college, has a focus in mind. My 23-year-old, he did a semester of college, and he's like, this ain't for me, Mom. And I'm like, well, you got to be happy. Find that passion, find your purpose, find what you want, and then go back to school if that's what you want to do, because that gives you more value. my 20-year-old, he's going to cosmetology school. He's wanted to do that since he was in the 7th grade, and he's loving it. He's excited about it, So each of my kids, each of my 4, my 18-year-old just decided that he wants to go be a special ed teacher. Wow. And so it's like, that is finding that purpose, finding that passion, and that IDIQ, right? That linking it to your identity and understanding how it comes from who you are. I think that's so important. It helps with achieving goals, achieving dreams, being happy, right? Yes. Who wants to go to school and spend all that money, be in debt, and do something that you're miserable at?
Right. And you won't do it well. When you do something, if you don't really enjoy it, you won't be that good at it. You'll just survive. And that's some of the issues, I think, with some of the doctorates and the MBAs. People do it because they think it's a ticket to success, but there's no connection with what they deep down would like to do, because there's no bearing on having an MBA or DBA at all. So there's a discord there. It's not congruent, right? So, and that reflects when they get into the workplace, because they're not putting it into practice because they don't really want to deep down.
Right.
Right, absolutely. And I have a very interesting thought here, because I follow Neil deGrasse Tyson, the famous astrophysicist. Absolutely have a man crush on him. So he once during one of his talking engagement to a sort of question raised by the audience. I can't remember what it is, but he just said, "Look, I've taught so many people in math classes and physics classes, and then he said, I can assure you that not everybody was smart. So just because you get out there with a degree and with all these the adornment, so to speak, like not everybody is smart." And you're absolutely right, Ross, about the pass mark. I mean when I checked on the local the MBA pass marks, and even in medical school, we're talking 40 marks, 50 marks, and that's almost like, you're expected to, like you could not know 50 to 60% of the stuff and still get through. So my question is, who needs to get an MBA? Let's start with MBA, and then we'll maybe dabble a little bit with the DBA. Who should get an MBA? Is there an answer to that? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think it depends on the career field, right? I mean, there's a degree brings a historical background of knowledge to career fields, right? So if you're going into something like social work, going in to be a counselor, you're going into consulting in like a big 5 firm, where you need to know a little bit more about the science and the theory behind organizational development or organizational design or leadership theory and how to communicate, those types of things. Those master's degrees help give you that next level of understanding.
Sure.
Because then you can, hopefully you're doing those master degrees while you're in the job, though, while you're there, so that you can take what you're learning in the books, that academic aspect of it, and actually apply it in a practical live environment, so that it's not just book smarts. Because the theory isn't what's important. It's your ability, you being smart, you being intelligent and successful at your role is about your ability to take that theory and adapt it to the situations that you're in.
I think that's spot on, Nicole. For me, this is my analogy. I'm from Africa. This is a low light tracking binocular. Right. And I think that if the MBA is there, this one creates a 3D dimension, and it's very clarifying. And if that's what the MBA is doing, it's giving you 3 dimensions, layers of meaning and applied learning. That's when I think it comes to its fullest fruition. But sometimes you get people who do masters and it stays in the corridors of the faculty, a very rarefied knowledge. So I think that's the challenge. How do we create this rarefied knowledge to really move humanity forward in a way that's much more accessible? I think that's the real challenge in education curriculums worldwide. And I think it's fascinating that Sri Kumar Rao, the most popular program at Harvard was a course on happiness. I think that's kind of telling.
Yeah.
It gives a message, doesn't it, Alison? That's a message.
That's a message. That is a message.
It's subtle, the subtle parts of being human, that's the key, right? Because to me, degrees and all that's teaching you the process of business. You know the process, you know how things move, but business aren't built on process. They need a process, but they're built on people carrying out the process. Because without the people, it doesn't happen. There is no business. So, and that's the difference. There's a lot of lump of people there, and then it takes leadership to move it forward. And that doesn't need, you don't need to be highly technically equipped to move it forward. You just need to know how to connect with people and have the processes up to speed through well-educated people who've designed it. But you need to leave it forward because you connect with people, and you don't get a degree in that. You can't teach it. You've just got to go and learn it and live it and practice it. And like you said, Alison, you learn these things in business. You had to learn how to connect with people, otherwise your business doesn't survive. That's that's the difference.
Right. And here's another interesting thought. Like I always bring this story. Whenever we are talking about education, a friend of mine, his mom, I'm talking 3 decades of experience in her respective field, and she's well known and very, very accomplished. She really wanted to go to the next level, and there was this large international nonprofit organization that absolutely wanted her in. Now, but what they said to her was, the job is yours, but our rules, or rather our internal processes, state that a person who takes up this job needs an MBA, so therefore we can't give you the job. So go get an MBA. This job will wait for you for a year. And she did go get, she just kind of flipped the book. Okay, let me just do this MBA. Just got it. I mean, the job was hers. She had the experience. She had the knowledge, and it was just more like a prerequisite just to get in. So my question here is, as managers, all right, as CEOs or as organizations, is there anything that you can do to counter this, create a ripple effect if everybody starts to say, you don't need a degree, and what are your thoughts on that? Because obviously it's a big industry, it's a very lucrative, you could even say business almost, the business of education. So any thoughts on that? Can organizations play a role in balancing the two?
Well, I think you're seeing a shift in that concept anyhow, right? Because look at Google, look at some of the other companies that aren't interested necessarily in your degree, they're interested in your thought process. Look at the number of certifications that people are looking for. They're not looking for a degree necessarily all the time. Yeah, big 5 firms, if you want to go through the ranks, you come in with a bachelor's degree, and if you want to go up to senior manager and partner and principal, you've got to have that master's degree, right? But at the manager level, and to get to senior manager, all you have to have is a master's or a certificate of some kind. So project management, a certificate in coaching, whatever it might be that relates to the field that you're moving up in, is a certificate. And I think that as we start to relook at education and the cost of education, it starts to change the view that organizations have on whether masters and doctorates are needed. You know, because the more higher the higher you go in education, the higher you have to pay the person to compensate them for the money that they've put out to get their degree.
Yes.
Sure.
Yes.
That's
Alison,
right.
Ross, any thoughts? Yeah.
Well, I agree with what Nicole's saying. That the companies, a lot of my clients often have that conversation now, is that it's not that they just look at hiring people with attitude that they believe who can be effective and create an impact through their thought process and the way they connect. Not so much have they got pieces of paper, because see when there was a big thing in the MBAs. Given my grey hair, I've been around a while, so I remember back in the it would have been the 90s when it was the 80s to 90s, more than the 90s, when people say I've got to have an MBA. So there's people out going there doing it. Well, see, when you get 20 years on, people are now realising those people who got those MBAs 20 years ago, they really haven't produced that much. So we're not getting the value. So why put as many people through it? Now, people should still go through it for the right reasons, but not as though you've got an MBA, therefore you're guaranteed to be a good leader or good at whatever you do. You just got to look at people who can create an impact and have the right attitude. And that's the key. If you want them to go and learn some suppository amounts of information and data, then they can go and study that.
Absolutely.
And then,
That's a good point.
that's what you do, right? Rather than study first and then expect it to be the winner, because we're realising it's not. All the money they've spent on putting people through MBAs, there's no return.
Right.
They're no different than what they were before they went.
Correct. Alison, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, interesting what you were saying, Ross. I think it's touched on what is in the MBA curriculum. And I think there's some gaps in the knowledge process, some applied gaps, and some of the things that they're not teaching are things that are incredibly important in real life, which is intuition, self-mastery, conversational intelligence, so many different things.
I agree.
I'm friends with somebody, Gamia Drummond-Hay, who's like the Greta Thunberg of evolved conscious education. And she's bringing such an interesting dynamic into what it is to be diversive and inclusive, and how do we take that conversation forward, as you are doing here, taking hard conversations forward. So I think there's a real shift in the world to wanting real conversations. And that should be happening in the faculties as well, because it's taking those real conversations into real life. And I think, Ross, you said, I saw on one of your on your website, you said influencing people is what separates leaders from managers. Influencing people was
That's right.
It's the people element.
Right.
And
that
actually,
for me, it's about humanizing our workplace.
And like you were just speaking there, Alison, I was thinking, here's the degree, a degree in human effectiveness. So all those things you're saying could be the subjects in getting a degree in being effective. To me, that has more value. And if I was an organisational corporate HR or something, I'd be looking for people who've got a degree in being effective, because in that degree there would be a lot of practical work of being effective. Hell, that's what I want here, right? The rest they can go and do later. We can teach that. This stuff, this is good stuff. So let's stick together, Alison. We might develop it, right? Wait on the academics.
I'm on a mission.
Well, there we go. Degree in being effective. There you go.
Sure. For sure. And I think it's safe to say, just like everything in life, that not all MBAs and DBAs are created equal. And I think that's we can safely say that. But now comes the important question. The good programs are most often quite costly. And I'm going to look at you, Nicole, because I did study in the US. I did my my bachelor's in Michigan, and I went to a mid-sized college, I suppose you could call it, and it was tough. it was tough, and if not for the grace of my relatives who for some reason decided to bank on me, and they all kind of sort of literally crowdfunded my education, and still we barely got through. Now, but that's just I mean, when you're talking about the big Ivy League universities and some of the other colleges, it's so expensive, and we've heard about students getting into student debt and they're paying it off forever. How do you look at it? I mean, how do you even pick an MBA? Like quality, cost, it must be a tough choice.
I think it comes back to purpose, right? So I've done a lot of mentoring with the younger kid. I call them kids, right? They're not kids. My staff and seniors that I work with at the consulting firm, or when I was in the Army with the junior soldiers, the enlisted soldiers, and the junior officers, and talking to them about that next degree, right? The bachelor's degree, the master's degree, and understanding, what do you want to use it for, right? Why are you going after the degree? What do you want the degree to do for you? If you want the degree, if you just want to stand on credibility alone because you've got a degree from Harvard, okay, go get your degree from Harvard. But I tell you, there are some programs out there, they don't carry the impact that the Harvard name carries. They don't carry the impact of Princeton, those Ivy League schools, right? But they're hard. They're grueling. They put you through the paces. They have you. I've talked to people who have taken master's degrees. I did online master's degree through Capella University, and my master's degree was no joke, right? I wrote papers and had to do research and had to interview people and had to understand what it was I was studying so that I could apply it in real world situations as I was going through the Army. So purpose. Understand what you want to do and select your school based on that. Don't select it based on the name. Because at the end of the day, you get that piece of paper and there ain't a single person asking you who you got that piece of paper from. They want to know, do you have it? That's all they care about. That's
interesting. Before I move on to the rest of the panelists, I have one question, Nicole. How did you do 2? Right, like what? I mean,
yeah, I had that same thought too, Varun. Yeah.
My bachelor's was psychology with an emphasis on clothing and textiles. I wanted to be an image consultant when I went to my undergraduate school, and then I joined the Army, and I got going through the Army, and I was like, okay, I'm going to do my master's degree. And so I went with industrial organizational psychology, and I focused on organizational behavior and organizational design because, I'm an officer in the Army. There's purpose in understanding organizations, understanding leadership, how to shape behaviors, how to build culture, how to connect with your people. That's why I took my first master's. My second one, I came back from Korea. I did 3 years in Korea where I got my first master's online. And I was at Leavenworth and I was bored. I wanted to go back to school, but I wasn't ready to pursue a doctorate because I didn't know what I wanted to do for the doctorate, but I needed to do something. I still wanted to be in school. So I went and got a master's in business, or not in business, management and leadership, because it was a complement.
That's awesome. That's awesome, Nicole. So over to you, Ross and Alison. Let's stop that, shall we?
Yeah, well, I'd be struggling. I'd be taking 100 years to go through all that. But there again, as I said before, I've got a master's in performance management. I just thought I needed it because I work in Asia, because I look at bits of paper. But I've never ever had anyone ask. I don't even have it on a lot of my cards, and I don't even mention it. It's just there. I enjoyed it only because I researched what I wanted to research, which didn't actually correlate to the exam results because they wanted me to research something else. But I went off researching what I wanted to do because I wanted to learn something, not pass an exam. I just passed, but that's because the key is to get as much out of it if you're studying, to get as much out of it as you can, not study for the process side of it, but study for the actual value of it. Because it did teach me to research a bit more. So that's what it taught me. But see, people,
Wonderful.
you're not there to pass an exam. You're there to learn as much as you can from whatever aspects you can learn from. Now, whether that passes the exam with honours, you had to struggle. You've got to pass, so you've got your bit of paper.
Sure.
But honours to pass, no one cares. No one ever asks. As a matter of fact, if you got a degree from Harvard, you put yourself under more pressure because people see that, oh, you got an MBA in Harvard, therefore their expectation is a lot worse. So if you're faltering, they go, oh, damn Harvard, like you're at Harvard, you should be better than this. So you put yourself under more pressure. So go to a no-name university, you know, no pressure, but you learn just as much.
Right.
Under promise, over deliver.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Exactly
absolutely.
Right. That's right, Nicole.
So I've got an interesting angle in the sense that I am an ambassador for integrated living. It's been part of my personal journey to become fit, healthy. I'm 20 kilograms lighter than I used to be. So part of my integrated living is I want to keep myself whole. So I was worried about going to do a master's degree because I was scared it would affect the balance and the incredible integration I'd found. So what I did was I did a huge amount of diplomas, including nickel, image consulting, personal branding, conversational intelligence, coaching, you name it, like such a broad degree or such a broad variety of diplomas. And that brought me so much joy without the angst, without the deadlines, without the assignments. And it was broader. So in a way, for young people listening, it's also important to enjoy the journey. Like somebody said, when you stand on Everest, yes, you achieved that if you achieved a remarkable goal. But you've got to enjoy the journey of training for 3 to 5 years, because otherwise, why are you climbing Everest? So it's the same process. I've so enjoyed every single diploma I've done in the last 5 years. It's been a kind of a soulful, growthful journey. So I guess that's where I've come from, is that if you can enjoy it and still learn and grow and grapple and learn, integrate. That's what I've done for the last 5 years. And I did do an entrepreneurial diploma after 18 years in business to feel, was a 1.5-year diploma, to feel that I know, but it was more to see, do I have gaps? Do I have gaps in my learnt experience versus the knowledge-based experience? So, and it was great that I did that, because then I felt a sense of, when I do stand and talk, I have got some gravitas, some credibility, without having gone through all the fear about ongoing assignments and relentless study, etc. So I think I found the middle road in a way.
Sure.
Yeah. And just on that, you're saying, Alison, about the enjoyment. That's another thing, right? If you're enjoying it, you'll actually retain what you're learning longer term.
Yes.
If you're doing it just to tick a box to get through, that's why a lot of people give them another 6 months to a year after they've forgotten everything. Like, that's why they don't apply it, because they don't remember it, because their focus is passing the exam. If you focus on what you're learning, you retain it, and they're the people who will add more value with that degree or that doctorate when they're in the workplace, because they're retaining it and they're enjoying it, because they're seeing how we practically do it in a practical way. Where if you're there trying to pass and focus on jamming as much in to pass, then it does pass straight through, past you and gone within a couple of years. And that's why they struggle. It's the way they're learning it, not necessarily what they're learning.
Yep.
Sure. And I really wanted to follow up. I'm so glad you brought it up, Ross, because my next question was going to be, to all three of the panelists about. I mean, you've done your legwork, you've got your masters, and like Alison, you've got so many diplomas and so on. In your experience of going through these programs, have you identified certain gaps that the program itself doesn't address, or things that nobody told you about these programs that are going to be absolutely essential, to bring back to the corporate world, or rather to bring back to your job? What
Yeah.
would those gaps be, and what advice would you give, anybody who is either going through any of these programs or is actually contemplating on going through these programs?
Critical thinking.
Okay.
Critical thinking.
Yes.
I think that, and it's interesting, right, to watch the younger generation come into the workforce with master's degrees, with certificates, whatever they might have, and they've got the theory. I've got it. I know what I'm supposed to do, but they don't know how to ask a question, right? They don't know how to dissect a situation and create a broader, a contextual understanding of what's going on around them, so that they can take those pieces of the theory and actually apply them to the work. And so I think that academics lose that, because it's all about the books, it's all about the past and what was done historically. It's not about how do you want to apply it. One of the things that I enjoyed about my master's degree, my first master's with the IO psychology, was that they asked a lot of, given that our papers were all around, given this context, how would you apply it in your workplace?
Right.
Given your context, what are some examples or some leadership situations you've been in, or what are some organizational impacts that you've seen? How would you use this to change a problem in your organization? And I think those are the most impactful classes that I've had.
I agree with that, Nicole. That's what you're saying about the context, because quite often the context disappears. It's like, and they'll be working on case studies. They're like cold cases, right? They're just cold. Context is warm. It's because it's real. It's now. So if people are in their learning process, they've got to, don't wait for the lecturer to be giving you the context. You should be doing the context all the time. You're learning a piece, take it back to the workplace mentally, put yourself in the context back there to the theory you're learning now, then that will resonate and stay in your brain a lot easier, because you've got a feel for it. You feel the emotional side of it because you're in the context. And emotion, you remember. You don't remember thoughts long term. We only remember what we feel, not what we think.
Right.
When you go two years down the track, right? So if you can feel it as much as you can, you'll retain it more. But when it's cold, you don't feel anything. It's just a bunch of words.
Yes.
Sure. Alison, any thoughts?
Yes, I think the one gap that's come up for me is that life happens through conversations, and we live in frequency. And people feel our frequency before we even walk into the room and before we open our mouths. And the one thing I think that is really lacking, and it's really so helpful to people, is to understand how consciousness works. And for me, I have this next to in my office, and it's David Hawkins' Ladder of Consciousness. And I didn't realize till a few years ago that I lived a lot in guilt and shame and blame, which is the lowest ladder of frequency. And when I shared that and I allowed myself to move into other levels of frequency, I became so much more influential, so much more impactful, so much more inspirational. So I live in frequency now. I'm aware of frequency. I'm aware of when the levels of consciousness, Dr. Michael Beckwith says, life happens to you when you're in victim mode. It happens by you, it happens through you, and eventually when you're more enlightened or more aware or very conscious as a person, it simply happens as you. And I think there's a whole missing piece of the puzzle here, that we're just not engaging with that level of, we live in vibration. And I think it's just an untapped part of who we are.
Agree with that.
Sure.
I'm into quantum physics, Alison, so you're speaking my language there. It's all about frequency and energies and attracting, and you attract what you You attract what you feel. So that's it.
Right.
And you can put yourself down in the dumps, and then you'll stay in the dumps because you're attracting more people who are that way. So therefore, you never get out of it, right? So it's harder to. But yeah, it's all about frequencies, and it's all about making up your mind that, and it's your decision to live the way you want to live. It's no one else's. You can't blame any environment. It's your choice to live the way you live. And in some respects, when you get to the educational work, it's all theoretical, and it's removed from that connectivity with frequencies and humans because it's just data. So you learn data, and that's where it's not connected back to that context again, and where you should be and all that. And I have that conversation with executives. So same thing, what type of leader do you want to be? And they tell me, so, well, what behaviours you have to show to be described that way? And they'll tell me, so well, go and live it.
Yes.
Right. Very simple.
Yes.
Go and
yes.
Now, if you haven't got the discipline to do it, then you're just saying those words. You don't really have the motivation. So get out of leadership. It's no point.
True.
And I've had that conversation a few times, and a couple have resigned.
Yeah.
Because I realised I don't want to be a leader. People are too ambiguous. I can't handle it, so I should get out of it. Right? That's it.
Yeah, that's a really
well.
Good
It's a hard
point.
choice when you're CEO with 30,000 staff to actually decide to do it then, isn't it? So, but it happens.
Yeah, for sure. And let me just kind of piggyback on what Nicole said, and I think when we speak to other managers and senior managers in the corporate world, and one of the buzzwords that they feel that the new graduates, or rather the individuals coming into the workforce, lack is critical thinking. And thank you, Nicole, for bringing that. How do you So just for argument's sake, assuming the program doesn't address it, assuming there is nothing else in their life that's actually helping them, build that skill. If I am determined to build that, is there anything that I can do to build my critical thinking skill? Is there anything that I can consciously take action, or rather at least start today, so that I can start building my critical thinking, or rather ability? Any thoughts on that, Pal?
So when I'm training my new folks that come into a team, I work on that critical. To me, I work on the critical thinking piece, right? If I give you a task, or someone blows by and gives you a task, did you get enough information to start executing that task? If you have to come back and ask me, well, what does this mean? What does this mean? Well, did you think to ask the person that question when they were telling you what the task was? Did you ask some of the simple questions? When is the task due? Whose does the task have to go to? What is the task being used for? What is the purpose? It's teaching and having them think about the fact that, well, it's not just an assignment. I'm not going to go just write a paper and I have to turn it in by a certain date. It has to be a certain number of words. No, there's a purpose, there's a target, there's an outcome that's desired because this task has been given, and you have to understand what that is. And when after I have that conversation with them a couple of times, I get where I'm like, you've got to ask the question. So after 3 or 4 times, if you haven't asked the questions, you're going to go do the work, and then you're going to have to come back and redo the work until you learn to ask the questions. You have to see what's going on. Sometimes that's the only way to learn it is, and you provide a safety net, right? You, as a leader, you have to be responsible enough to provide a safety net for them so that you're watching out. Well, did you think about this? Have you thought about that? Because it starts to build for them, and they start to, through experience, through watching examples of it, they start to learn it and start to pick it up. Some people, they just don't get it.
Yeah, that's right. Some people don't get it, and they'll go and get something else in some other field. They'll get something in life, but it'll be in some other field. It's in the wrong spot. Yep.
Sure. Ross, any thoughts on how you might coach or mentor or help one of your employees or colleague or peer build critical thinking skills?
Well, I guess it's through asking questions and it's giving support. Exactly what Nicole said, right? You just got to be there and support, but ask questions, ask good questions. Good leaders ask good questions. It's the old adage that you're not trying to tell them anything. It's just ask a question that has them think. And by them thinking an answer, gives them the answer.
Sure.
But they've thought of the answer, not you. But you're trying to help them to think through things and have the confidence. To me, it's just confidence and critical thinking, and belief in yourself that you do have thoughts of intelligence,
sure.
Or however you judge that, right? So I don't know what that really means, thoughts of intelligence, but the fact that you've got confidence within yourself that you do know things. And therefore you can start, well, say critically thinking, but you're thinking, and a lot of that can be intuitive, and that's the bit there. It's not just something that's black and white. It can be highly intuitive. It could be and manifest in a critical thought, but it came from within you, not something I read in a book or I heard someone else say. That's the other aspect. It's a lot of it's intuitive.
Absolutely, I agree. Alison, any thoughts on that?
Yes, touching on what you said, Ross. It's for me, I try and instill courage into people, because for me, courage is the thing that unlocks your creativity and your ability to think wide and broad and to tap into your intuition. For me, courage is the bridge. It's the bridge. And I know when I'm in that sort of slightly shut down, overwhelmed state, I'm not going to be as courageous. So sometimes we have to allow people, we firstly have to build up their courage and then allow them to make those forays, because I think it's Dr. Joe Dispenza that says there are no mistakes, there are only lessons. And if you have that mindset and that culture in your workplace where there are only lessons, we're all just on a journey, learning lessons, it somehow frees people up to embrace that way of thinking. So for me, courage is the untapped bridge that many of us don't see in the process. It takes courage to start a master's degree. It takes courage, Nicole, to carry on doing more doctorates. It takes courage to start a diploma. It takes courage to make your voice heard in the boardroom. So, yeah, for me, it taps into that personal development element of, that's been the missing bridge for me. That's been the missing bridge for me.
And see, courage comes from within. It does not come from your head.
Yes.
You can't tell yourself, I'm strong, I've got a lot of courage here. It comes from within you to come out, right? So, and that's part of the aspect of having the courage to think and all those things, but courage comes from within. And so if people meditate or just relax, reflect, that they're connecting with their inner self, that gives them the strength to keep going. Because all the head tells you is what you can do wrong, what someone else has told you, or someone's opinion reckons I can't do this or whatever. That's all your head space. Your courage comes from within. All good leaders lead from within to lead out. It's not the other way around.
Absolutely spot on. Absolutely spot on. So I think we're approaching our last 10 to 15 minutes, and I have to touch on the topic of DBAs, even though there are common areas that overlap with our discussions about MBAs and whether they were needed and how to go about obtaining an MBA, but then how to get the necessary skills to complement it. Let's talk about DBA for a second. It's relatively new. There's a lot of I think people haven't quite understood what it is, and then some equate it to a PhD. It's not the same as a PhD, right? DBA is a doctorate in business, is it? And Nicole?
So DBA, when you did this, the DBA was the first time I'd seen it. I mean, it would stand for Doctorate of Business Administration, the same way the MBA would, right? I mean, it's the equivalent of a PhD. They still have to do a dissertation. They still have to go through that process. It's still going through that doctoral program, because
Sure.
it's no longer about being a consumer of education and being a consumer of the theories and the knowledge that you're looking up. It's actually trying to take your experience, take the knowledge and the lessons that you've learned, and now turn it into something more practical, right? Creating your own theory, creating your own process or procedure that you can apply within your field. So like my dissertation that I didn't get finished when I was doing my PhD was on, I interviewed coaches on how coaches coach strategy for leaders, like how did they explain that process and what did that process look like? And I actually developed my own coaching process that I use when I work with people to do transformation coaching. I call it transformation strategy coaching, and I work with them from moving from where they are now to where they want to be in the future, and creating deliberate action plans that help take them through that process. And I created a 5-step process for doing it that comes both from experience in the Army and from the theories that I learned in school. So that's what the doctorate brings to you, right? Whatever term you want to put on it, the educational doctorate, which they'll tell you is not the equivalent of a PhD, the DBA, the PhD. It's all that same process. It's
right.
So.
Oh, interesting. Who should get it though? Like if I'm a senior manager or like should I get that? And I know this goes back to the original question. Does the same apply here? I mean, should you do it only if you really want to enjoy the process, or are there circumstances where having it would help, or you could use it as a vehicle to research or explore a topic, just like what Nicole just said. Any thoughts, even Ross, Nicole and Allison?
I think it comes back to what you want, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
I went through the process once already, right? I mean, literally, I wrote the dissertation. I got it approved by my committee. I was waiting for the college to approve it and to get it published. So I had 2 quarters left, basically.
Right.
But I did it because there was, what I took away from it was a culmination of life experience, right, between education and my work experience. And I was transitioning. I knew that my transition from the Army was around the corner, and I wanted to have that with me, that doctorate with me, so that when I went out, I felt like it was my credentials, it was my credibility.
Right.
It was that thing that helped me not feel like I had an imposter syndrome, which is funny because I still feel that way sometimes, right? So it's like, okay, do I have the background that I need to have? Well, sometimes having the degree makes you feel better about it. I'm going back for my EDD because I want it, not because I need it, not because it's going to give me value to the job that I'm doing. It's simply because I want it. I want to be able to say that I accomplished a doctorate. That for me is part of my journey.
That's it. That's, to me, that's a good reason.
Yeah.
Right.
Because it's about you. It's whatever value you place on that, that's important, because you place a value. So you're going for something of value to yourself. That's the key. Not, I think I better get it because other people say I need it.
Yep.
You're going in for the wrong reasons.
Absolutely.
Except for that example, Varun, that you were saying about that lady who went and did a 12-month.
Yeah.
That's specific. That's very valid. But she wanted the job, so she was prepared to do it to get that job, right? That's probably an unusual case. But what I'm saying is, if you just go and get it because you feel as though I'll get one because it might be whatever, and it's very loose, to me it doesn't add the value. But something that you really want within you, that's different.
Sure.
So I think that brings up an interesting point, right? That value. What does it mean for you, and what do you want? Is it something you want? And having kids that are in that age of going from high school to college and having to move into adulthood and decide the path they want to go down. I think we do a great disservice to our youth in making them think that college is their only choice after high school.
Agreed.
Right.
Yes. Yes.
There
I
are
think what
things out there.
Yeah. I think what we're talking about today is part of a bigger debate. It's
Sure.
part of a bigger debate about world education and making MBAs more human and making our evolved education even at school level, and somehow integrating these two, that the higher level education, doctorate is integrated knowledge, and the foundation we lay at schools has some humanity in it.
Agreed.
So
Yep.
I think there's a shift in the world. I really believe there's a shift into the world, and this deep conversation is part of it.
You're right, Alison. I do hear the subject of the discussions about in different countries about the education system more than I used to. Always had it,
Yes.
but
Yes.
I'm now hearing it more for those exact reasons. It needs to be more humanised, and there again goes back to employers saying we want people to be effective with some impact.
Yep.
Not
Sure.
just skilled in the ability to memorize data. That's all education is, right? In a lot of cases.
Well,
so
our
it's changing.
Yeah, the basic education system, it's kind of interesting, right? Because the basic education system was set up when we started to, in the industrial age, right? We wanted people to understand how to be little automatons and do processing and do these assembly lines.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's,
Still
I mean, that's what our education system was created for, was to create these little automatons. Well, our society has evolved from that, right? We're no longer just an industrial age society. We've moved beyond that, and we've got so many complexities when you look at the globalized world, and look at this. We've got 4 countries represented in this conversation today, right?
Yeah.
And we're touching how many more with your viewers. It's amazing to see what we can do, but we can do that because we have people like you and Allison and Ross who want to reach out and touch and be human, connect, create that emotional understanding, and build a world that embraces that instead of shies away from it.
Yeah, you're saying that, Nicole. I was just thinking because we're educated in that old way to provide employees or people to survive in the old ways. To me, artificial intelligence is replacing that aspect of business. What's left is the thinking, the impact, the effectiveness, the contextualizations, all those things, all those soft, the connecting with people. But the hard process can be done by artificial intelligence. So we need to change the education system to set people up for the new decade, for example, where people will be employed because they no longer are in the process. They're now in the management of the process more so than the actual conveyor belt line and stamping something as it goes past.
Absolutely. All right, panel. I'm afraid we are almost out of time. So before we wrap up, let me ask you a question to end on a positive and hopeful note. So if there was any one takeaway message to our audience, from this session, if there's anything that they should walk away with today, what would that one takeaway message be?
Pursue your education from a place of purpose.
Exactly, and I'll just say, in as a consequence of that, use the education for what you can actually learn for yourself. Because what you're learning, other parts is what the academics want you to pass. So you pass that, but try and take out of it what you can learn for yourself that's going to add value to you.
Right. Very valid points. Thank you, Nicole and Ross. Alison?
The last thing I wanted to say is that I think COVID has taught us the nobility of all work.
Sure.
of
True.
all work and all professions in a way that we never saw before. And so it's integrating the nobility of our knowledge into moving the dial of humanity forward. That for me is what this discussion's about.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's a very, very, very good point. Well, with that said, I'm afraid we're out of time, and we come to a close of today's conversation on MBAs and DBAs in the corporate world, whether they're requirement or adornment. Once again, a huge, huge thank you to our guests, Alison, Ross, and Nicole. Thank you so much for being with us here today. It's been nothing
Thanks,
but a
Varun.
pleasure. Yeah, thank you. And do stay back a few minutes after our live session has ended for a short debrief. And a big shout out goes to the Luminary team and to our audience who tuned in today. Thank you very much for joining us. And another reminder to our viewers, all our past episodes of This, That, and the Other and our other webinar series are available on Luminary Learning Solutions YouTube page. So do swing by our page and don't forget to like our videos and hit that subscribe button. Next week will be our season finale, and we'll be talking about another topic that's rarely explored, science and pseudoscience in corporate training. And we'll be separating fact from fiction. So don't forget to tune in next week. I'm Varun Chandra Mohan. Thank you for joining us. See you next Saturday.